Palestinians have long accused Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of war crimes for the way his forces have operated in Gaza. Today, the International Criminal Court, based in the Netherlands, agreed he should be put on trial. It issued arrest warrants for Mr. Netanyahu and his former defence minister, Yoav Gallant. It also listed the Hamas leader who led the October the 7th massacre, but of course, he is already dead. One charge against Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant is that they have used starvation as a weapon of war in northern Gaza and still are. Making Mr. Netanyahu a wanted man is unlikely to affect his prosecution of the war. Israel and its main ally, the United States, are not, of course, signed up to the court's rulings. He will, though, have to be careful where he travels outside Israel. He accused the court of anti-Semitism.
There's not much left in northern Gaza, where, according to the UN, Palestinians are facing diminishing conditions for survival. Critics say Israel has withheld aid to force civilians to flee. The Israelis deny ethnic cleansing. But the dire and desperate situation on the ground right now is the reason why the ICC not only issued the arrest warrants, but warned that similar conduct appears to be ongoing. In other words, the alleged crimes are still being committed. Israel's Prime Minister and his former defence minister are accused of the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution and other inhumane acts. Tonight, the first leader of a democracy to ever face such charges said it was a black day.
The court in The Hague accuses us of a deliberate policy of starvation. This when we've supplied Gaza with 700,000 tons of food to feed the people of Gaza. That's 3,200 calories for every man, woman and child in Gaza.
Testifying to a select committee in Westminster last week, this retired NHS surgeon became visibly shaken as he described working in Gaza.
A bomb would drop, maybe on a crowded, tented area, and then the drones would come down and...
Today, he said there was plenty of evidence to back up the ICC charges.
It's pretty unlikely that the United Nations, the WHO, Amnesty International, Save the Children, Oxfam, and 32 UK doctors and nurses who've written to the Prime Minister and 99 doctors and nurses from the US who've written to President Biden are all in some vast conspiracy and making it all up.
What Mr. Netanyahu is accused of doing in Gaza means his name will now be added to the list of accused that includes Putin of Russia, Gaddafi of Libya and Bashir of Sudan. This former prosecutor at The Hague says it's a significant moment.
Symbolically, I suppose it means that justice is being seen to function, or at least to attempt to function. And that's terribly important and very good news.
However, the chances of Mr. Netanyahu ever going on trial at The Hague are extremely slim. He will have to steer clear of the 124 countries obliged to arrest and extradite him if he ever turns up. From now on, Mr. Netanyahu is stuck with the stigma of being regarded as an international fugitive by 2/3 of the world. John Irvine, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
And Ro is here to talk about all this. Look, this is obviously not going to have a practical effect on Mr. Netanyahu unless he chooses to go to one of the countries that is a signatory to the ICC. But how impactful and important do you view this as being?
Well, I think that depends where you're viewing this from, because seen from Israel, this is clear. The view in the government there and in much of society is that this is a case built on misinformation and anti-Semitism. And frankly, in the US, the Trump administration, the incoming administration, isn't really very far away from that. I think what's more interesting is the rest of the world. Here and across Europe, we have broadly kind of centrist governments which are trying to fend off populist threats and are often doing so with their celebration of the rule of law. So they have a question here because many of these countries are the allies of Israel and Netanyahu. And perhaps most interesting is what's happening across the global south, Southern Asia, in Africa as well. I've spoken tonight to 4 senior diplomats in 3 African countries, and they say the same thing, that to their populations, the ICC is broadly viewed as a tool of the West. And here is that institution finding against their man. These are the words of one diplomat today. And so there is a question there about how populations right across the world see the Western alliance more broadly, the United States in particular, and the way that they consider their right, as it's perceived, to be the sort of moral leaders of the world. That is really under threat today. And with that in mind, today's decision is really significant.